Imagine standing at the base of a structure that cost over $3 billion, a glass and steel giant soaring into the Georgia sky, designed to be the crown jewel of the Atlanta skyline. You look up, marveling at the sheer engineering brilliance required to stack thousands of tons of concrete and luxury finishes into the clouds. But then, you hear it. A sound no one ever wants to hear in a skyscraper. A sharp, rhythmic crack. A groan of shifting weight that sounds less like a building settling and more like a giant bone snapping under pressure. Within hours of the grand opening, the champagne hadn't even gone flat before the first fractures appeared in the foundation. This wasn't just a minor settling issue. This was the beginning of a 12-year legal and structural nightmare that would see billionaire developers, world-class architects, and city officials pointing fingers while the literal ground shifted beneath their feet. Today, we are diving into the staggering failure of Atlanta's most ambitious tower, a $3.3 billion symbol of prestige that turned into a monument of litigation. When you think of a $3 billion price tag, you expect perfection. You expect a building that can withstand high winds, seismic shifts, and the test of time. But the luxury tower in the heart of Atlanta's financial district was built on a foundation of overconfidence and, quite literally, unstable ground. To understand how a project of this scale begins to fall apart on its very first day, we have to look at the atmosphere of the time. Atlanta was booming. The city was desperate to cement its status as the unofficial capital of the South, a global hub for tech, finance, and luxury living. The plans for this tower were nothing short of legendary. It featured a rotating sky lounge, floor-to-ceiling windows with views spanning all the way to the Blue Ridge Mountains, and a structural design that was supposed to be revolutionary. It was marketed as the safest, most stable, and most opulent residence in the country. But the red flags were there before the first crane even arrived on site. Geotechnical reports, those boring but vital surveys that tell you if the dirt can actually hold 1 billion pounds of building, had suggested that the bedrock in this specific patch of Atlanta was inconsistent. In some areas, it was solid granite. In others, it was a crumbly, weathered mess of schist and clay. When you're building a shed, that doesn't matter. When you're building a vertical city, it's the difference between a legacy and a disaster. The developers, eager to meet a strict deadline tied to massive interest payments, reportedly pushed ahead, opting for a foundation design that many experts later claimed was insufficient for the uneven terrain. Opening day arrived with the kind of fanfare usually reserved for Olympic stadiums. The lobby was filled with the city's elite. But as the elevators began their high-speed ascents, the staff started noticing something wrong in the sub-basements. Hairline fractures were snaking across the load-bearing columns. By the time the sun set on day one, those hairlines had become deep fissures. The sheer weight of the finished tower was compressing the soil unevenly. One side of the building was sinking millimeters faster than the other. In the world of high-rise engineering, a few millimeters of differential settlement is an earthquake waiting to happen. The stress being put on the glass facade and the steel internal ribbing was astronomical. Within weeks, the residents, people who had paid upwards of $5 million for their units, started reporting that their doors wouldn't close. They'd wake up in the morning and find that a marble tile in their kitchen had popped off the floor and shattered. This wasn't just settling. This was a structural crisis. And that is when the mirrors of the legal world started reflecting a very ugly reality. Lawsuits began almost immediately, and 12 years later they are still climbing higher than the tower itself. The first wave of litigation came from the Homeowners Association. They didn't just want their titles fixed. They wanted a guarantee that the building wasn't going to lean like a modern-day Tower of Pisa. They sued the developers for negligence, claiming that the haste of construction led to corners being cut in the most vital areas. But the developers didn't take it lying down. They turned around and sued the architectural firm and the engineering consultants. Their argument was simple. We paid you to design something that works. If it's cracking, your math was wrong. This created a massive, multi-directional legal war. Imagine a courtroom filled with hundreds of binders, each containing thousands of pages of blueprints, soil samples, and emails from 10 years ago. The engineers argued that the developers changed the materials midway through construction to save costs, adding weight that wasn't accounted for in the original plans. The architects argued that the contractors didn't follow the blueprints to the letter. And the contractors argued that the soil reports they were given were fundamentally flawed from the start. It became a revolving door of blame where everyone had a PhD and no one wanted to write the check. As the years dragged on, the physical state of the building became a secondary concern to the financial black hole it created. Because the litigation was ongoing, no one could sell their units. The value of a luxury condo plummets when the disclosures section of the contract is 40 pages long and mentions structural instability. The building became a ghost of its intended self. While the lights were on and the lobby looked pristine, the bones of the structure were being held together by temporary steel shoring and a prayer. What makes this specific Atlanta case so fascinating for fans of engineering failures is the sheer scale of the ego involved. Usually, when a building has issues, people work quietly to fix them. But because this was a $3 billion project, the stakes were too high for quiet fixes. Every remedial measure required a permit, and every permit was used as evidence in a court case. If the developer tried to reinforce a column, the residents' lawyers would claim it was a confession of guilt. So for years, the building sat in a state of suspended animation, functional enough to stand, but broken enough to be a liability. The technical reason for the cracking finally came to light during the 7th year of the legal battle. It turns out, a massive underground water vein had been redirected during the excavation phase. This water was slowly eroding the stable side of the foundation, causing a localized collapse of the soil density. It was a classic man versus nature scenario where man assumed he had won because he poured enough concrete. Nature, however, has a lot of patience. The water found a way back to its original path, and in doing so, it began to undermine the very pillars holding up the luxury sky decks. Think about the irony here. People paid millions for a bird's-eye view of the city, only to realize that the most important part of their home was the dirt 50 feet below the street level that they never even thought about. The lawsuits eventually expanded to include the city of Atlanta itself. The plaintiffs argued that the building inspectors should have caught the foundation issues during the various phases of the build. The city argued that their job is to ensure code compliance, not to verify the deep subsurface geological integrity of every private project. It was a mess that entangled the public sector in a private disaster. 12 years later, the legal fees alone have surpassed the cost of many other skyscraper projects. We are talking about hundreds of millions of dollars spent just on lawyers, experts, and consultants. And the cracks? They've been patched, but the underlying issue remains a point of intense debate. Modern engineering allows us to fix almost anything if we have enough money, but you can't fix a reputation that easily. This tower, once meant to be the pride of the South, is now a case study in university architecture programs under the heading of What Not to Do. The human element of this story is just as dramatic. Imagine being a retired couple who put their life savings into a penthouse, thinking it was their final, glorious home. Instead, you spend a decade in the middle of a war zone. You can't leave because your asset is toxic, and you can't stay because every time the wind blows, you hear the house groan. The mental toll of living in a failing megaproject is something that rarely gets talked about in the headlines, but it's the heartbeat of the litigation. These people weren't just suing for money. They were suing for the decade of peace that was stolen from them by corporate greed and engineering hubris. As we look at the skyline of Atlanta today, this tower stands tall. To a tourist walking by, it looks like a success. It's shiny, it's tall, and it's impressive. But to anyone who knows the history, it's a monument to the danger of move fast and break things when applied to civil engineering. You can move fast and break things when you're building an app. When you're building a billion-dollar tower, if you break things, they stay broken for a generation. The ongoing nature of the lawsuits means that the final chapter hasn't been written. There are still discovery motions being filed. There are still engineers being deposed to explain why a specific grade of steel was used over another. Some experts believe the tower will eventually require a complete underpinning, a process where they basically have to dig a new foundation under the existing one while the building is still standing. It is one of the most dangerous and expensive procedures in the world, and it might be the only way to finally stop the legal clock. If there is a lesson to be learned from the $3 billion Atlanta crack, it's that nature always bats last. You can have the best software, the most expensive materials, and the most famous architects in the world, but if you don't respect the ground you stand on, the ground will eventually remind you who is in charge. It's a recurring theme in failing megaprojects. Whether it's a sinking skyscraper in San Francisco or a cracking tower in Atlanta, the story is always the same: a rush to build, a disregard for the environment, and a decade spent in a courtroom trying to figure out who is going to pay for the mistake. The Atlanta Tower stands as a warning. It's a reminder that bigger isn't always better, and faster isn't always more efficient. The next time you see a massive construction site in your city, look past the cranes and the glass. Think about what's happening beneath the surface. Because, as we've seen in Atlanta, the smallest crack in the basement can lead to a multi-billion-dollar earthquake in the courtroom. The layers of this story go even deeper when you consider the impact on the local economy. For 12 years, this building has occupied prime real estate but has failed to generate the tax revenue and economic activity it promised. Shops that were supposed to open in the ground floor retail space remained boarded up for years because the developers couldn't guarantee the structural integrity of the storefronts. A project that was supposed to revitalize a sector of the city became a stagnant zone. Wait, let's talk about the actual engineering for a second. How do you even fix something like this? It's not like you can just put some duct tape on a structural pillar. They tried something called grouting, which involves injecting a specialized concrete mixture into the soil to try and stabilize it. But in a cruel twist of fate, the pressure from the grout injection actually caused a secondary series of cracks in the lower levels. Every time they tried to fix it, they created a new problem. It's like a game of structural Jenga, where every move is monitored by a team of lawyers. The lawyers themselves have become a permanent fixture of the building. In fact, some wits in the local community joke that the building is now 50% concrete and 50% legal paperwork. The complexity of the case is so great that a special judge had to be appointed just to manage the sheer volume of motions. We are talking about millions of documents. Digital forensics teams were brought in to sift through decade-old emails, looking for that one smoking gun email that proves someone knew the foundation was failing before the ribbon-cutting ceremony. And what about the futuristic rotating sky lounge that was supposed to be the building's main attraction? It hasn't rotated in years, not because the motor is broken, but because the slight tilt of the building has misaligned the tracks. If they turned it on, the friction would likely cause a fire or further structural damage. It stands frozen, a stationary reminder of a vision that was literally too heavy for its own feet. As we look toward the future of urban development, we have to ask, will we learn? Or are we destined to keep building these glass and steel trophies that crumble under their own weight? The Atlanta Tower isn't an isolated incident, but it is one of the most expensive. When you calculate the original $3.3 billion cost, plus the estimated $2 billion in legal fees and repair costs, you're looking at a $5 billion mistake. That's enough money to build a small city. The residents who still live there are in a strange kind of limbo. They live in luxury, but with a constant asterisk. They have the best finishes, the best views, and the best address, but they also have a structural monitoring sensor installed in their hallway that beeps if the building shifts more than a fraction of an inch. It's a surreal existence, living at the peak of prestige while fearing the foundation. This story is far from over. As the latest round of lawsuits moves toward trial, new evidence continues to emerge about the shortcuts taken during the 2008 financial crisis, when the project was struggling to find funding. It seems the day one cracks were just the beginning. The real story is the 12-year cover-up and the battle for accountability that followed. It's a tale of corporate ego, engineering failure, and the relentless power of nature. The Atlanta Tower serves as a tall, shiny proceed with caution sign for the rest of the world. It tells us that no matter how much money you spend, you can't bypass the laws of physics. It tells us that a building is only as good as the ground it's built on. And most importantly, it tells us that once a structure starts to crack, the legal system will make sure those cracks stay open for a very, very long time. Looking at the skyline, you might see a beautiful building, but when you look closer, you see the patches. You see the reinforcement, and if you listen closely, in the quiet of the night, you can still hear the sound of a $3 billion dream slowly, steadily shifting against the reality of the earth. It is a haunting sound, one that echoes through the halls of the tower and the courtrooms of the city alike. As the years continue to pass, the question isn't whether the building will fall. Modern engineering will likely prevent that catastrophic outcome, but whether it will ever truly be finished. Can a project ever be successful if it spends more time in litigation than it did in construction? The residents, the developers, and the city are all stuck in this legal spiderweb, anchored to a sinking foundation that shows no signs of stabilizing. In the end, the $3.3 billion Atlanta Tower remains a paradox. It is a feat of engineering and a failure of planning. It is a height of luxury and a depth of legal despair. It is a landmark that everyone knows, But no stays in by choice if they have another option. It is the perfect example of what happens when the desire for a world-class icon outweighs the necessity of a solid foundation. The next time you're in downtown Atlanta and you see that shimmering spire, take a moment to think about the 12 years of chaos that have unfolded inside those walls. Not the drama of the residents, but the drama of the very steel and stone itself. It is a story of tension, movement, and the enduring quest to find someone, anyone, to blame for the fact that the Earth simply didn't want to hold a $3 billion secret. The Towers saga has also changed the way high-rise insurance works in the United States. Insurance companies, seeing the astronomical payouts and the never-ending litigation, have hiked their premiums for novel structural designs. This tower didn't just hurt the people involved. It changed the financial landscape for every skyscraper built after it. It proved that the risks are not just theoretical. They are real, they are expensive, and they are incredibly persistent. As the sun sets over Georgia, the glass reflects the orange and red of the sky, making the tower look like it's glowing. For a few minutes each day, it looks exactly like the masterpiece it was intended to be. The cracks are hidden in the shadows, the legal documents are tucked away in downtown offices, and the building looks perfect. But then the sun disappears, the temperature drops, and the materials begin to contract. And in that cooling air, the faint, rhythmic ticking sound returns. The tower is still moving, the lawyers are still drafting, and the $3.3 billion mistake continues to grow, 1 millimeter and one legal motion at a time. This isn't just a story about a building, it's a story about the limits of human ambition. We want to touch the sky, but we have to remember that we are always tethered to the ground. When we forget that, we don't just build homes or offices, we build monuments to our own errors. And in Atlanta, that monument is 1,000 feet tall and covered in expensive glass. The lawsuits will eventually settle. The repairs will eventually be completed. And perhaps in another 20 years, this will all be a forgotten footnote in the city's history. But for now, it remains the most visible and expensive structural failure in the region. A reminder to every architect, every developer, and every city planner that you can't cheat the foundation. Because when the foundation fails, everything else, no matter how many billions you spend, is just a very expensive house of cards. We see this happening globally too. From the Millennium Tower in San Francisco to the Burj Rafal in Riyadh, the struggle to keep massive structures vertical in changing climates and shifting soils is the new frontier of engineering. But Atlanta's case stands out because of the timeline. 12 years of active litigation is an eternity. It spans multiple economic cycles, changes in city leadership, and shifts in the very way we design urban spaces. It is a marathon of misery for everyone involved. What's next for the tower? New rumors suggest a complete rebranding. The idea is that if you change the name and the marketing, people will forget the history. But you can't rebrand a lawsuit. You can't rebrand a structural crack that is documented in 1,000 news reports. The building's identity is now inextricably linked to its failure. It is the cracking tower, and it will likely hold that title longer than any world-class award it might have won. As we wrap up this deep dive, keep in mind that the world of megaprojects is full of these stories. Some are hidden behind non-disclosure agreements, while others, like the Atlanta Tower, play out in the public eye for over a decade. It's a world where the stakes are billions of dollars and the margin for error is measured in centimeters. The Atlanta Tower serves as a reminder to always check the fine print and the foundation. It shows that even the most impressive structures can have deep-seated flaws that no amount of money can easily fix. It's a story of ambition, oversight, and a legal battle that seems to have no end in sight. In the high-stakes game of skyscraper construction, the Atlanta Tower is a cautionary tale that will be studied for years to come. It's a symbol of what happens when human ingenuity tries to bypass the stubborn realities of the earth. And as long as those lawsuits continue to climb, the tower will remain a testament to the fact that some mistakes are just too big to disappear. Think about that the next time you look at a skyline. Every building has a story, but some stories are written in the cracks of the foundation and the fine print of a lawsuit. And those are the stories that truly define the cities we live in. The Atlanta Tower is more than just a building. It's a 12-year lesson in the cost of getting it wrong. The saga continues to this day, with new structural assessments being performed every 6 months. Each report is a new piece of evidence, a new reason to argue, and a new reason to keep the legal fire burning. The tower stands, the people live, and the lawyers work, all of them bound together by a $3 billion mistake that started on day one and shows no sign of stopping. It is the tower that wouldn't stop cracking, in a city that wouldn't stop growing, involving people who wouldn't stop suing. A true modern epic of failed engineering and legal endurance. It reminds us that while we can build up toward the heavens, we are always balanced on the fragile, shifting crust of the earth below. As the legal bills continue to pile up, equaling the height of the tower itself, we are left to wonder when the final crack will appear. Not in the concrete, but in the resolve of those fighting the battle. Until then, the tower remains a silent, shimmering witness to the cost of hubris in the heart of the South. The building is a masterclass in the complexity of modern construction. From the mechanical systems to the envelope design, everything was top of the line. Yet none of that matters when you have differential settlement issues. It's like putting a Ferrari engine in a car with a broken axle. It looks great in the driveway, but it's a disaster on the road, and this car cost $3.3 billion. As we conclude this analysis of one of the most significant engineering and legal failures in recent history, let's remember that behind every headline about a cracking tower are real people whose lives and investments are on the line. The Atlanta Tower is a monument to them as much as it is to the engineers and architects who designed it. It's a story that is still being written, one floor and one courtroom at a time. The $3 billion price tag might have bought the best materials, but it couldn't buy a guarantee against the shifting ground. And that is the most expensive lesson of all. The lawsuits are still climbing, the building is still settling, and the world is still watching to see what happens next in this 12-year-long drama. When we look back on this era of construction, the Atlanta Tower will stand as a defining example of the challenges we face when building bigger and bolder than ever before. It illustrates the need for humility in the face of nature and the importance of getting the basics right before you reach for the sky. The story of the Atlanta Tower is a stark, let's say a vivid reminder that in the world of megaprojects, the smallest detail can have the biggest impact. Whether it's a soil sample or a contract clause, the details are what keep the building up and the lawyers away. In this case, those details were missed, and the result is a $3 billion monument to litigation that continues to dominate the Atlanta skyline. We will keep an eye on the future of this project as the next decade of legal battles unfolds. Will the tower ever truly be stabilized? Will the owners ever see a return on their investment? Only time, and a whole lot of engineering, will tell. For now, the tower stands as a reminder of the fragility of our grandest designs and the enduring power of the earth beneath our feet. The Atlanta Tower's journey from a symbol of progress to a case study in failure is a fascinating look at the intersection of technology, finance, and law. It highlights the incredible pressure to deliver massive projects and the consequences when that pressure leads to overlooked risks. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into the $3.3 billion Atlanta Tower failure. It's been a journey through some of the most complex engineering and legal challenges of our time. From the first cracks on day one to the ongoing lawsuits 12 years later, this story is a testament to the complexity and the drama of the built environment. It reminds us that our cities are not just collections of buildings, but living, breathing, and sometimes failing works of art and engineering. Keep an eye on the horizon, because as long as we keep building toward the clouds, there will always be stories like this one. Stories of ambition, error, and the persistent search for a solid ground. The Atlanta Tower is just one chapter in the long history of human construction, but it is one that won't be forgotten anytime soon. Its shimmering glass may hide the cracks, but the history is etched into the very foundation of the city. As we look at the tower one last time, let's appreciate the complexity of what it takes to build the world around us. And let's hope that the next $3 billion project takes a little more time to look down at the dirt before it starts looking up at the sky. Because in the end, it's the ground that determines how high we can truly go. The lawsuits might climb higher than the tower, but the lessons learned from this failure will hopefully reach even further, guiding the next generation of builders to create structures that are as stable as they are spectacular. Until then, the Atlanta Tower remains a fascinating, frustrating, and incredibly expensive piece of the urban landscape. A $3.3 billion crack in the dream of perfection. The saga of the Atlanta Tower is a story of our times, one of massive investment, global ambition, and the unforeseen consequences of pushing the limits of what is possible. It is a story that continues to unfold, proving that even the most solid-looking structures can be built on shaky ground. And as long as they are, there will always be more cracks to fill and more lawsuits to file. The building is still there, the people are still searching for answers, and the Atlanta Tower continues to stand as a monument to a 12-year battle that shows no sign of ending. It is a true mega-project failure, and a story that will continue to captivate anyone interested in the complex, high-stakes world of modern engineering and construction. The story of the Atlanta Tower, with its billion-dollar price tag and its decade of legal drama, is a unique chapter in the history of failing megaprojects. It's a story defined by its scale, its persistence, and its reminder that no matter how high we build, we are always grounded in the reality of the earth we inhabit. Watch this space as the story develops, because the legal and structural challenges of the Atlanta Tower are far from over. It is a masterpiece of a mess, and one that we will be analyzing for years to come. Stay curious, keep looking below the surface, and remember that sometimes the most interesting things about a building are the things that were never meant to happen. The Atlanta Tower is proof of that, and its story is one of the most compelling examples of engineering hubris and legal endurance in the 21st century.